Yes. Okay. We're gonna start this pod off. We're already talking about so much gear. I think, Gary, we're both gearheads.
Oh,
I think
major gearhead.
I think that's obvious. And everyone who I've talked to who has built something in their life there's obvious passion, whether it's tech, whether it's, for me, I feel like it was guitar in the beginning days, and you have this kind of like obsessive quality about things, and that seems to be like a very common theme. And so I'm just going to intro you real quick. So you're the founder and managing partner of Initialized Capital. Your co-founder is Alexis Ohanian, who is very an outspoken, awesome individual, co-founder of Reddit. So Initialize, the little tagline is, we fund tech companies before product fit. So you have companies like Coinbase, Instacart, over $40 billion in market value, and you make YouTube videos.
Oh yeah, I love YouTube.
I love that so much. So that's why I'm so excited to chat with you. But going back to what I was just saying, what was that for you? What were you obsessed with as a kid that kind of was the first thing in your journey to then becoming, working at Microsoft, to building companies, and to where you are now?
I mean, I think I was so lucky in that my parents were really just supportive of my obsession with computers from, even when I was 3 or 4. Like, I didn't learn to hold a pen and write things. I learned how to type on a keyboard, and I learned how to use DOS. And, I wrote my first story in WordStar. If anyone remembers that, they probably don't, because it was like the 80s. So literally, computers have been my life. And I learned about the internet when I was 12 or 13. And it was clear to me, oh, that's going to be the future. The infinite book. I saw this PBS documentary that you can find on YouTube now called "The Machine That Changed the World," and from there, my whole life became actually about this machine that, even in 1993, 1992, it was clear it was going to change the world. And then now, I would have worked with computers for free, and I think I underestimated what would happen with what's happening today with technology and
the value creation. And it still seems like we are in the beginning somehow.
Oh yeah. And that's the coolest thing, is like we get to build some of it. I mean, I know you studied double E, and like just being a builder, now we get to actually create it, which is the magic of it. I mean, I think 100%. Of like making YouTube videos is actually, really a powerful type of medium. It's as powerful as writing code. And
that's why I find you so fascinating, because usually the VC community, they write blogs, they tweet, but that's kind of where it stops. And I think there's something with video that is...
And it's a little boring.
Yeah, exactly. It's not exactly the sexiest thing, right? I don't think the majority, normal people are going to sit there and read like a VC's blog. But it's been really cool to see your YouTube channel and some of your videos kind of, pop out of that inner circle and kind of share stories and share these things that you wouldn't think would hit the mainstream, but there's really great lessons that you talk about. And one of the first videos that I saw of yours, and it was a great title, you crush it with the titles, it was my $200 million mistake. And so it was when you were 23, didn't know anything about startups, and Peter Thiel offered you a huge equity stake in a company that he was building with some of your friends. So
yeah, which is IPOing this year, which is crazy. Finally, 17 years later.
So tell me a little bit about where you were in your life then. Graduated college, had a decent job at Microsoft, and you were like, nah, I'm going to stay here. Why did you say that?
Man. I mean, well, so I grew up, child of immigrants, and honestly, actually, it was like computers gave me everything that I have, actually. And so that my, being at Microsoft was the pinnacle, right? Getting a super solid, today, getting a job at Google or Facebook. Yeah. I had health insurance.
What's that?
And then what was cool? Oh yeah, health insurance is very important, actually. What's funny is when you're that young, it actually doesn't matter as much. I guess now it matters a lot.
Literally, you triggered me when you said that, because I just turned 26, so that was the moment that I have to figure out on my own. So I've been spending the past month of just researching where to go, because you know, when you run your own business, it's not as simple as just getting on the health insurance of your employer. So yes, it is important, but that's been such a journey recently.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness for the Affordable Care Act and universal health care for all coming soon, I hope. Knock on wood.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
Sorry, I interrupted you though. So parents were proud, working at Microsoft, health insurance, heyo.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, working on Windows Mobile was fun. So it was 2003. So what's funny about technology is I actually became one of the people who could build database-backed websites very, very early. So I got to work at the online agency that made the first Apple e-commerce store.
Wow.
And so one of my mentors worked directly for Steve Jobs to make that, and they won like all sorts of awards for the first time you could buy, I think it was an iMac with a credit card on the internet. And then the funny thing about tech is that by 2003, all of the web-based companies were sort of dead. You know, the first Web 1.0 was over, and the hangover was pretty severe. Like, I wanted to work at a startup in 2003, and they didn't really exist, even in the middle of Silicon Valley, like coming out of Stanford in 2003. So the next best thing I thought was like, okay, well, the web is dead, which is stupid because Facebook wasn't going to be invented for another year.
Wow.
Like, if you wanted to invent Facebook, you would have invented it on the web right at that moment, right? And but I mean, that's one of the crazy lessons that I've learned over and over again. Like, every single moment in technology, it feels like it's over, right? This is the end of history. You know, everything that has been made will be made. And that's never been true. Like, every generation, you know, I was chatting with Mark Andreessen, who created the web browser. And he said the same thing when he made it, you know, when he came to Silicon Valley. Like, this is a guy who made the first web browser, right? And he came to Silicon Valley to start his company and thought, oh, it's over, right? I missed it. It was the PC revolution. The idea that you could have a computer on every desk.
Yeah, given that context, though, I could see how when you're in the middle of it and you look around and you're the one with a stable job at a big company, I mean, that kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah. And I was happy, you know.
Yeah.
I had a great job and got to go to the martini bar every Friday night, you know.
Yeah.
And I had a brand new car, and you know, lived in a nice part of Seattle. It was stable and really, really nice, and so there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, and I think what you're mentioning is pretty on par with what's happening now, in that, of course, it's a lot of external forces of, you know, shit hitting the fan in everywhere. But then we're seeing a lot of things in certain industries that seems like the end. And for sure in hospitality and travel, I mean, that just seems like it's over forever. Yeah. And it's a little different than the internet, because the internet is all encompassing. You know, there's no way that you're not going to be able to Google something at any point in the next 100 years, I think. But how do you see some of those similarities with what's happening now and with some instability in some of these industries? And in the early 2000s, that big tech bubble that burst, I'm sure that did feel like the end of the world.
Oh yeah, totally. I guess the big lesson there, you know, why I said no to Peter Thiel was that they were working on something totally different that I had never heard about before. And the interesting realization is that if you only go by the thing that you read about, or see a YouTube video about, or whatever, you're actually you're not going to create new stuff. You're just going to like sort of chase what was happening like 9 months ago. And then all the interesting stuff is basically a bunch of creators making something in a room that nobody else had ever made before. And so what they were saying is, hey, we're going to go and make software for the government and sell it like enterprise style, which is
sexy.
Really, really hard, right? And I was like, well, I haven't read anything about this, so I'm not going to do it. And then that's actually exactly the opposite. Like at 23, and what I do now, working with really early founders all the time, is to help them realize, actually, it's okay if it's not hot or you haven't read about it. In fact, that's what makes it even more likely to be the thing that goes and changes the world, because nobody else is thinking about it. But that doesn't mean that the world doesn't need it. right?
Yeah, and that's where that huge value is if you can get in it on the ground floor and you have those expertise that is useful in those industries. How do people find that? You know, maybe there's someone listening that says, dang, it's so cool to see maybe creators who started a YouTube channel, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, ahead of the curve, but how do I do that now? Or maybe they see all these startup founders who have built something and now 10 years later, oh my gosh, 20 years later, oh my gosh, look at Facebook. How do you think those people, those founders, those creators find those unique, whether it's entire industries, whether it's, you know, a niche within a niche? How do you find that? If someone's like, I want that, I'm creative, I'm an engineer, how do I find the next thing?
Oh man, it's so hard. I have a bunch of examples that are, I think, kind of interesting. I mean, Flexport, for instance, is a company that if you know anything about freight and trucking and, you know, getting big boxes over from China to here, you probably heard of them, but generally nobody's heard of them. It's like $1 trillion industry, actually. So, you know, when you go out and look at the ocean and see these, you know, giant boats filled with shipping containers, like Flexport is the thing that helps people actually buy those shipping containers and get the stuff over here. And that founder figured out that this was a big problem because I think it was his brother who ran one of the biggest importers of medical hot tubs. So something like they were just
Wow.
crazy hustlers for trying to, you know how you go on YouTube and you find all these videos about drop shipping and things like that. I think they were
You could be making $40,000 a month.
Yeah.
Drop
and
shipping.
So, yeah, they basically figured out that through doing something very different and strange, like becoming the top of their industry through something like that, you know, Ryan Peterson of Flexport realized, hey, there's no software over here. And we could actually, you know, people are actually using paper and pencil and fax machines and like emailing like Excel documents back and forth.
Wow.
And, you know, that's actually the most obvious thing you can do today is if you look at how the world still works, like today you can call a car with an Uber, you can get, you know, a place to stay with an Airbnb, like 2 clicks, right? And, you know, everywhere in the world, there are people who go to their jobs and, you know, they go out to lunch, they take a photo of their lunch, post it to Instagram, takes 2 seconds, it's so easy. And then they go back to their work and they're like, oh, like, where's that file again? And then, you know, what's the number? Let me call this person, right? So, and like the whole world still actually operates like that. Like look at like hospitals still work like this. Education, like universities still work like this, like schools work like this. You know, everywhere you go, there's no software in it. And so it's actually everywhere. Like the opportunities are actually everywhere. And then the harder part is just like, what are people actually into? Like, you know, sometimes it's their friends were into this thing and pulled them into it, or I don't know what, right? But the weirder the better, right? Like, you know, that how do you become the number one importer of medical hot tubs? That's about as obscure as you could get at some level. But
well, I mean, I think that's such a good example because if you're doing anything in the world, if you have a normal job or if you find yourself building maybe a somewhat normal business or a niche business like that, when you start going through the systems that were in place before you got there, you realize, oh, there's a lot of inefficiencies. And so many 10 million, even $100 million worth companies, I feel like, are just being waited to be created because of those inefficiencies. Just like you said, if there's just one software program that you can build that every single person who ships from, you know, something from point A to point B uses, oh my gosh, that's like printing money.
yeah. And we're
You know?
sitting in front of computers right now. We're like, if you just sat in front of the computer and like wrote, like, it doesn't even have to be an app. It could be a website.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
the website like goes like that. Like, here's something that people want, and here's this, you know, something that people are going to pay for it. You just put them together, right? And it's like better, cheaper, faster.
Yeah, and that's why it's so exciting. And I think a lot of people see that and they say, okay, well, easy for you to say, Garry. Maybe, you know how to code or you have product manage experience. And what is can you explain like the no code movement that is happening in this world that I think it'll definitely obviously be a coexisting world of coders and non-coders, maybe designers who use these non-code tools, but it's still, I feel like every day I go on Twitter and I see a new article like no code movement, making moves, like watch out world. But when you click on those links and you learn about some of the tools, some of them are interesting and helpful, but at the end of the day, there's still some of those missing links in between. Okay, I have an idea. I might not know how to code. There's no way to make it if I don't know how to code. But it seems like there's some interesting tools being built in that space.
Well, not everyone can code, but everyone can use a spreadsheet, right? And so I think that that's actually what's happening. 90%, like when I talk about working for Steve Jobs, making the first Apple e-commerce store and making a database-backed website, 90% of that could actually be covered by, instead of database, you have a spreadsheet, right? It's just like rows and columns, and that's it. And then when they say no code, what really actually powers it is being able to have things automatically happen. So if you get an email, if you have a website and someone enters a form entry, it goes from that form entry into a spreadsheet. And then say you have a sales team, you want the sales team to do something with it. So you might take that spreadsheet where, that person wanted something from you, and then you connect Zapier to it, which is another website that you can use to connect to that spreadsheet. And so when that happens, it could send an email, and you send an email to someone on your team.
It's
like,
connecting
hey, you got to
the
go
dots.
do this thing now. Yeah. And so that's workflow. And then the magic is you can do all of that without having to know how to code or set up a server or maintain anything. And so I think that that's really cool. And it's something that actually anyone here watching, like if you know how to use a spreadsheet, you can fire up Airtable and, use Stacker on top of that and make web forms and automate a bunch of stuff. You can run a whole business off of it without ever hiring an engineer, actually.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many exciting tools out there, and especially what Apple has been low-key doing with shortcuts is really cool. A lot of people don't even know that shortcuts exist on their phone, but there's so many things that you can automate just from the shortcuts app, the automation app.
The thing I miss the most on shortcuts?
What?
If you find this, you got to tell me.
Okay.
There used to be a shortcut to download YouTube videos onto your camera roll.
Oh, did they take that away?
YouTube broke it. So, I mean, obviously they don't want you to download them, but as a creator, you need that. You need it all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, how do I get content, right?
I use that 4K video downloader app, but it's not on your mobile device, which
you got to
is a
do
bummer.
it on your computer, which is annoying.
Yeah, but it's so cool to see people building the shortcuts, even outside of just what Apple offers, but using Zapier, using all of these things. There's if then that, or whatever that stands for. There's so many cool automation things that you can do. And you mentioned Airtable, and I'm obsessed with Notion for the past 6 months. I've literally built my entire life around Notion, and it's so cool to now have relational databases that talk to each other. You can do a lot of different automations and calculations within those databases, and it's fun to me because it kind of reminded me, I'm not a coder, but I switched my double E to computer science, so I have 3.5 years of that.
College,
okay,
so,
amazing.
Yeah.
Only difference, you completed your degree.
I don't know. I don't feel like I actually learned anything from the degree. Actually, all of the coding I learned was just on my own from the web and YouTube videos and stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's what was missing for me. I got so burnt in college because I was expecting the practical stuff from college, and I was like, if this is what this is, I don't want anything of it. So I wish I did some more personal projects outside of it. Maybe it's me putting too much on college for saying they ruined it for me, but you ruined it for me, guys. But using Notion makes me feel like I'm using the side of my brain that was being used when I was coding, and that's why it's so fun for me. So I'm thoroughly enjoying all of these tools that we have now.
And it's a gateway drug into
yes.
actually coding.
And that's true. I mean, that is so true. Well, let's go back to you in college. What were those projects that kept you busy? And what is the value of college when you can do a lot of this on your own?
Oh, yeah. See, that's the tricky thing that I now realize. I did end up going to Stanford, and I didn't come from wealth or money or anything. My parents couldn't afford the Princeton review courses, so I went to the library and did the 15 SATs directly out of it. I was watching your video that you had to get the perfect ACT, and I was like, oh, that was me. I had to deal with that. But it did change my life. And that's the kind of crazy thing about, colleges and credentials. Like, the hard part is like society, there is a great sort in society. And that's sort of the scary thing. Like, I never would have met Peter Thiel. I never would have learned about startups or how startups get financed. I never would have learned even that venture capital existed or how to raise a fund without like going to a place like that. And so for me, it's like, well, that still exists. Like these are sort of old world things. I'd like there to be a lot more things like that. That's where I think like 368 is really, really cool because that's what 368 is for creators. Like, watching like, Matisse Thybul going through 368 or you went through, I mean, all of these things are sort of guilds almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, I went through the Adobe Creative Residency, which helped me a lot.
Adobe Creative, that was really cool too. And like the world actually needs a lot more of things like that bring together people who are really excellent at what they do, and then they go off and do all of the other things. And so college is just one version of that. But that was actually the real value to going to Stanford. Like the classes were fine, and I probably used not a crazy amount. Though studying the humanities was very useful, actually.
What was useful about that? What were some of the things that stuck with you even today?
I remember taking a super intense course at my freshman year because I knew I was going to be an engineer, and it was called Structured Liberal Education. And I found out a bunch of other venture capitalists actually also went through that program who like ended up studying engineering. So
interesting.
And
what
you studied basically from the beginning to end of like basically human history. So starting with, Greek, Aristotle and Plato, and brought you through, I mean, you studied the Bhagavad Gita, you studied just basically all of the different world religions and different philosophies up through Freud and postmodernism. And, for me being 18, I wanted to understand the world. And I thought, well, here's 4,000 years of people writing down what they think the world is about.
Let's start there.
Yeah, that sounded like a pretty good place to start. And then the main conclusion, though, was like, actually, nobody knows what is going on. And that's actually okay. Like, in the moment, I was really depressed because I'm like, oh, even Plato and Aristotle, they don't have it figured out, right? Freud didn't have it figured out.
See, I feel like people, depending on who you are, you do one of two things. That either comforts you because you're not alone, or it freaks you out even more because
so it initially
if these people didn't have it figured out, what am I doing?
Yeah, but then at this point, like 20 years later, I realized that was a really important step to go through because now I realize it's all made up.
Wow.
But then the fun thing is you get to make it up. Like, and you're doing it right now, which is fun. I mean, that's the beauty of being a human being. And just like, that's what we're put on this earth to do, actually, which maybe is what Camus or Sartre said. So
no, I love that so much. And, I don't think it's a coincidence that podcasts, even though they've been around for 10, 20, 30 years, that they are having this resurgence because people want to hear just people tell stories and tell their story and remind you that you're not alone and people have gone through similar things and the struggles and the high points. And everyone has their own story, but there's something, I find it comforting that, okay, even the most baller people at some point thought that they just wanted to give up or they just felt so confused. I feel like with a job that's so outwardly facing where people are giving you so many comments and so much feedback about you as a person.
Oh yeah.
I feel like I have to always remind myself that okay, you don't have to have it figured out. Like, I'm sure, people have come before me and figured this out. Yeah. But it kind of is a different beast.
PR version. That's why other VCs, when they go out, it's like the most polished version of themselves, right? And then I don't know. Life is too short for that, right?
Well, so what made you start a YouTube channel? Here you are with, you're in venture, which is a very exciting world, lots of money, talking with founders, trying to build things. But at the same time, I feel like there is a desire to keep it, a little close to your chest. Don't share everything. You have secrets. You have, you're making essentially value. You're building value off of having that unique advantage or that unique info that you have and not a lot of other people have. So why start a YouTube channel? and why share more.
I mean, VC itself sort of started that way. It's like this cloistered, not very diverse world that is basically money, right? Like, and then even me being a VC is actually a strange thing because like I started as an engineer. I didn't study finance. Like I had no intention of doing any of that stuff. But what happened, the thing that changed my life was actually a guy named Paul Graham. So he was also an engineer and he wrote these books, Hackers and Painters. And he wrote an essay that I remember where he said, he didn't say in the essay Gary, but it felt like that to me reading his essays. You weren't meant to have a job. Right. You could go work at these big tech giants and they'll just like take advantage of you. Like they need you more than you need them. And that really spoke to me. That helped me realize, oh, this is actually how the world works. Right. Like the world wants you to be pacified. The world wants you to stay where you are. It wants to like commodify you into like a worker. Right. Like into a resume, like to compress you down into like a single 140 character line. Right. Those essays taught me, hey, I don't have to be that way. And then now realizing, so I actually met Casey Neistat. So through Alexis, he came by the office and I knew of him and it was really great to meet him. But then I saw how our interns interacted with him, they were, college students, they were 20 and they walked up to him like they were friends. And I was like, and that was sort of, and now like it's clearly what is happening today. Like that's why it's so powerful. It's a little weird though. Obviously, I'm sure this happens to you on the street in New York City all the time. It's
it
like
can get
people
weird,
just walk up to you.
But
right?
The majority of it is good because I always say I wouldn't even call it fame, but I say internet fame is the best kind because you're not a celebrity. You're not like your life isn't being affected by people quote unquote bothering you, but there's legitimately people coming up to you, whether it's in the streets or wherever you are, being like, I appreciate what you create. That just actually gave me goosebumps.
Yeah,
like
which is cool.
That is awesome. There's weirdos.
Now I want
don't be a
everyone
weirdo,
to have that.
But yeah.
Yeah, don't be a weirdo, please.
90% of it is awesome though.
And so yeah, I mean, I saw that and it's like, I mean, on the flip side, it's so important to be able to tell your story and to have a direct, like I love doing weekly vlogs today because I get to have like time with, I don't know, 1,000 random strangers. I'm actually very early in my YouTube career. I feel like I've only been doing it for 8 or 9 months. I have the gear of someone who has been doing it for years.
Your gear game. And we kicked off this podcast talking about your setup and my setup. I am very impressed. Very impressed. Because
coming from you, it means a lot.
No, of course. Because I just got to the level of using my fancy camera, my fancy audio to not only record, but also to, put it through Zoom. So now the person on the other end can see that too. I just arrived to that point. But the fact that you're already crushing that game is awesome.
Oh man, I got my softbox. I
love it.
I have my sideline over here.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I got my visual interest. I got the full bokeh. This is like f1.2. So.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you're basically a YouTuber.
Yeah,
Watch out,
yeah.
VC. Like, who needs to be a venture capitalist? You'll be a full-blown YouTuber in no time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the other thing that's kind of interesting about YouTube is like a lot of the people who try and teach you about business, they're also trying to get you to like join their course. Like, there are people who are very legit who are doing that, but some of them are like, oh my God, like, I don't really care about your Lambos, bro.
Yes.
Let's be real.
That is I don't talk about it a lot because I don't want to knock people who do that because on one side, I think the internet is amazing and it's amazing that you can pay $100, $500 for maybe that's an equivalent of like, a year in college for something. But so much of it is BS. It's really hard to find those courses and find those programs that are actually legit, that are actually not like, hey, I'm going to teach you how to interview for a Facebook job. Pay me $1,000. What? And it's like a Google Doc.
Why are you paying? Don't do it. Yeah.
And so I guess and maybe that's one of the things that these platforms are doing, whether it's masterclass or Teachable. Maybe there is a level of curation that has come about because of that, but those people that teach you about business, but their only business is selling their audience courses is just the worst. I'm like, no,
Yeah,
show me that you have success somewhere else, and then you can make a course, you know?
So yeah, in the background, I'm like, look, I really care about people and I really want them to succeed. And it is magic when someone sits down in front of a computer and makes a business and has that business grow. And it doesn't have to be venture backed. That's the thing. It's like, I believe in software. I believe in tech. Like, tech changed my life. Tech changes lives for people who I know like every single day. And then I want like not a little bit more of it. I want a lot more of it. Like, you know, everyone should sort of know this. And so that's sort of like my broader goal. It's like what Paul Graham did with his essays, I want to do with YouTube, and have this like direct connection with people who are watching.
Yes. Okay. So there was one Paul Graham blog post that just wrecked me. I think it was 2 years ago. And again, it was probably posted like before I was even in this world. But I think Tim Ferriss talked about it in one of his podcasts, and it's one of his most famous ones. And it's the manager versus maker schedule.
Oh, totally.
That blog post, I had never heard that idea put into words like that, and it literally just seemed like it added framework to my messy brain and why some things weren't working, because this is a very creative job. Editing, filming, you know, anything that requires creative output, you need blocks of time for that. You know, if I have a phone call at 10 a.m. and a phone call at 1 p.m., I'm not going to be doing any productive creative work within that 2 to 3 hour framework between the calls. I'm just not, because I have anxiety about the next phone call. I'm prepping for the first, and I need at least 30 minutes to get into the zone to even edit a video that's going to take me 5 or 6 hours straight.
Yeah. You gotta make space for that in your life.
Exactly. So the way he just laid that out in that, hey, a manager schedule is broken up into 30 or hour increments, and they just do it, and every hour is filled with another meeting, and that's their life. Creative people, makers, they need chunks of time. They need 4-hour sprints where they can do that creative work, whether they're coding or making a video. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so true. Yeah. This is amazing.
He lives it too. I mean, I worked for Paul Graham for a number of years, and it was like, it's amazing to meet your mentors and then to work for them. It's unbelievable, honestly.
Can we go through your history? Because it seems like you have just worked with, under, for like some legends. So what was the Apple website? So that was that your first thing out of college, or was it Microsoft?
Yeah, that was actually when I cold emailed when I was 17 to get my first programming job. And I just went on the web, and I was looking for people who made websites that I was very impressed by. And they had made this was 1998. So if you remember, I mean, if you went back and Googled what websites looked like back then, they looked like gray backgrounds with like borders, and then the blink tag and the under construction sign. So that was like what most websites looked like.
The under construction sign, yeah.
And then there was this one agency called Adjacency, run by Andrew Sather, who actually now works with me at Initialized. He was one of the first people to say, let's make a web page look like a real magazine. Like, we'll have a full page bleed. We'll use, JPEGs were new. Like, actually having an image that, could look like a photo was a new thing. And he would make a full page bleed, and he himself actually built that business off of cold mailing. It was like, even before email, in order to get people to even come on the web, you had to cold mail people.
Wow.
And so he made like these, he sent like 40 cold mails to tell brand managers and VP of marketing at like places like Land Rover and Power Bar and Specialized Mountain Bikes that the web was coming and you should pay attention to the internet. And it was a mail. And so he built his business on cold mailing, and then I got a job for them through cold emailing because I loved their websites. And then I was 17, and they were like, all right, come on, and we'll teach you how to write code and make these websites.
Wow. And so how long did you spend there?
Oh, it was like summers and weekends, and I just like worked whenever I could. So
Wow. And the Apple website, were you on that team?
I
that
didn't
was,
work on that. I got to
Okay.
work on the Specialized Mountain Bikes website.
Love
and I
it.
got a, and then at the end of that summer, I got a stump jumper, a full like just awesome,
That's awesome.
suspension bike that I took on the trails
Wow.
and got injured on.
Oh no. Well, yeah,
That's what happens.
I ride electric bikes all the time. My parents are always so nervous.
Yeah.
Like,
Do you have
"Be
the new Van
careful."
Moof yet, or?
I don't. I just ride Super 73.
Oh, that's yeah.
Yeah,
That's the
I'm
other
like,
one
I
wanna
prefer
get.
not to pedal at all.
Yes, smart.
Yeah. So after that, it was Microsoft.
Yep. And then I ended up joining my my friends who started Palantir.
Palantir. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And then how long were you at Palantir?
2 years, and then I started reading Paul Graham's essays and deciding, shoot, I should apply, and I applied and got into Y Combinator in 2008 with a social network idea that we wanted to work on called Posterous. It's a blog platform, actually.
And what year was that again?
2008.
Okay.
And then,
So
we were,
2008, you're
big
building a blog.
competitors to
Yeah.
Tumblr.
Tumblr. So why did Tumblr come out on top?
Did they come out on top?
Well,
Guess
I mean,
like
that's during that
They
time.
definitely
That's a good
They
point.
definitely came on top versus us.
Yeah.
But I guess that's a good example of not allowing other people to sort of define who you are, because we were similar to Tumblr in that we were both a blog platform, but now in retrospect, we're actually more like Instagram, because the iPhone was new. Everyone had the iPhone, and apps weren't a thing yet. Like the App Store was new. People didn't really know how to make apps yet. And so they would actually get their photos. The reason why we grew it to a top 200 site was that people wanted to get their photos onto their social networks. So I think like Facebook had less than 10 million users, Twitter had less than 10 million users. And so people wanted to post photos, and the apps didn't do a good job of it. And it was easier to take a bunch of photos, select a bunch, and then in Photos app on iOS, just click share to email. And then we were the first ones to say, just email post@posterous.com.
Oh.
And that was, because Flickr, you could do it with Flickr or any of the other
I mean, on
things.
MySpace, I used PhotoBucket.
Yeah, exactly. And there was like a secret password at photobucket.com, secret password at flickr.com, because they couldn't figure out the security. And then for us, we were like, we're going to use the headers to figure out if it's really you. And then you can just use post at. And so we're the first, that was like our trick that we've you need some sort of sleight of hand to get people to use you. And that was our trick to build a social network. And it's funny because when Instagram launched on the share page, today it's only Facebook, right? But when it launched, it was Facebook, Twitter, Foursquare, and Posterous. And so we were actually one of them. And so this is like a really good example of like a near miss, because that was actually why we were being used. And when Instagram came out, our growth actually flatlined. So,
Interesting. So
which is crazy.
So how long did it take to, because I imagine, this is your baby that you've built, and I'm sure there's ups and downs, but how do you know it's over? Like, how do you know that moment when Instagram came out wasn't just a pivot moment?
Oh man, we didn't know for another 6 months. I actually remember getting an email from one of our investors, and he was like, "Oh, hey, you're integrated in Instagram. What do you think of Instagram?" And then it was actually Chris Sacca, who's a really famous investor who invested in at Twitter and Uber and these other things. And before I could reply, my co-founder replies, and he says, "Oh, Instagram, it sucks." And I was like, "No." And then our investor replied, "I'm very disappointed in you guys," and he never brought it up again. And it's just funny because like we didn't even know for like another 6 months. Like we just started looking at our Google Analytics, and like it wasn't growing. Like we grew like 10x a year, 2 years in a row, and then suddenly it went flat. And then you had to pivot, right? And then me and my co-founder didn't agree on what to pivot on, and that's when I went to work at Y Combinator. I was just crazy burnt out. But that's why now, like when I make my videos, I really want to sort of find the people. Like we had a shot. Like we could, I mean, it's ridiculous because like hundreds of people in Silicon Valley, like 100 different startups could have made Instagram, and like it's ridiculous to even lay claim to that you could have, but we were like, we could have been a contender, right? And so now, like, as an investor, I find that my whole job is like find the people who could make the next Instagram and then make them it. Like, you've got to be it. Like, this is what you need to do. Like, I didn't hire well. I was a terrible manager. I screwed it up, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so how do I prevent other people from stepping in the same things that I did? And people do this all the time, right? Like 9 out of 10, 90, if you have like 100 startups in a room, like 90 of them are going to fail, right? Which is like really, really long odds. But, you know, if I can sit down with people and help them, like, most people die because of some sort of unforced error, right? So good investors can actually help people avoid death, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much serendipity. There's so much, there's so many things you have to get right to be that app, to be that website that gets it right, where it's almost like you have to be in a state where you're comfortable of just like failing onto the next until you hit that thing. And sometimes maybe people get lucky and that it's their first venture.
Yeah.
That's that. But I think that's why a lot of VCs say, okay, of course the idea is important, but what about the actual founder? What about the actual person who's steering the ship? And I feel like we're on this interesting wave of, I mean, it might be just because I'm so in it, but I truly feel like the new normal is going to be tech co-founder and influencer co-founder. And
I can see that.
There's so many people that have an audience, have influence, have a lot of skills when it comes to maybe not traditional product design and, you know, understanding the exact life cycle of a product, but they can get there if they understand how to build anything.
If you are a YouTube creator, you have to be an incredible empathetic person to understand your audience, to make something for them. And that's just the truth. And that's product.
Yeah, and that
that's
translates.
Actually product.
Yeah.
That's exactly what product is.
Yeah. And so what do you see, and this is like a very selfish question too, since, you know, behind the scenes on YouTube, I'm building my own thing with my friend Adam, a creative software. What is the biggest hurdle that you think this new dynamic duo is going to encounter? Because it is a little not normal. It's a little new. And essentially you're saying, oh, this person also has another job, another very public facing job. So what do you think is going to be some of the good and some of the bad that's going to come from that?
I mean, there are lots of, I think about Casey and, you know, and Beam, right? And that, I mean, I think that was one of the best possible situations where, you know, I think that from the outside anyway, it looked like they had a great sort of connection between like the you know, product and tech team and Casey, and that it really worked well together. And that's sort of the model to me at some level is when it works, you know, can it work that way? You know, Mr. Beast is doing fascinating things with apps today, and he's super smart. And I actually met him through my friend Blake Robbins, and I think that he's onto something really big there. Or even what David Dobrik's doing with disposable camera. I mean, that's really, really cool to see. And then whether or not it works will actually be based on, is there that symbiosis, right? Like, can the creator understand the process of creating, building a team, hiring people, like managing, like even getting in the bug database? I mean, that's when you know you're really doing the work. When you're like sitting in the bug database arguing whether this should be fixed in this release or the next release, right? And, you know, you're probably doing it now. So.
Yeah, I'm already there. We've completely... because, you know, the world is pretty overwhelming right now, but we've gotten to a place where we've stripped everything away and, okay, it's cool to have all of these 12 half-baked features, but let's literally strip everything down and go feature by feature. Start with the most important thing that we've been interviewing people and there's a consensus. Okay, this is obviously the most important thing, so we'll start there. Get that perfect, move on to the next one. And it's helped us to just break it down, and because it all seems so big when you're in it. It seems scary.
It's hard.
And you start, you know, really questioning yourself, like, oh my God, are we building the right thing? What is going on?
Those are the right questions though, right? And then the way you answer it is like put it in front of a user, and they'll just, you know, the hardest part though is like sitting in front of a user and trying to get them to tell you what they really think, because everyone's so polite, actually.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Except me, when I go on Twitter all the time, you know this. I will tweet Notion like twice a day. Hey, fix this. Hey, here's an idea. Hey, do. And they're a really good example of people. They're always on anywhere and they respond really quickly. They make you feel heard. So I think when it comes to customer service, that's huge, is just making the user feel heard. You know,
there's this great tweet from the founder of Zoom from last year before they IPO'd, where he's in the thread just like getting, you know, oh, what version of Windows were you using? Like he's literally doing it on Twitter.
I love that.
It's like, of course it's $100 billion company, right? Like they built something, they built a culture and like a whole organization that's built around this being awesome.
Oh, I love that. When Initialized says we fund tech companies before product market fit, that's y'all's ethos, or not ethos. Is that the right word? Y'all's
maybe
tagline.
A mantra. I don't know.
Mantra.
Yeah, that's our tagline. Yeah.
There you go. How? I've always found it so fascinating. Seed investing or anything around that is okay, kind of before there is a fully formed product, you know your customers. And it seems like there's a lot of risk with that. You're investing in something that you don't quite know has a fit out there in the world. So why and what is the biggest challenge with that?
I guess like our cheat code is like, because we built this stuff, when we look at other people's products, it's like, oh, that is well made. You know, there's this great thing that Steve Jobs talked about once where, you know, how a cabinet maker can actually tell if another cabinet maker is good. They don't look at the front. Anyone can look at the front and say like, oh, it looks nice. What a cabinet maker does is turn it around to the back. And then if that part is finished, then you know that that was made by someone who cares, who's like capable and smart, and that's how you know. So that's sort of our cheat code. I mean, when I met Apurva Mehta, who created Instacart, he was just like one or two people starting out, and I was one of the first 100 people to try Instacart.
Wow. So at that point, do they have a product that's actually out in the world, or is everyone only like doing small betas here and there, or what stage of the product is it?
He was a friend of a friend, I guess. So, a friend of mine was like, you got to try this. And I was like, yeah. And then they wanted to get into Y Combinator, and I was a partner there, and I could have, and he emailed everyone. I was the one who replied, and I said, oh, it'd be almost impossible to get you in right now. And it was like a 10-week program, 5 weeks were over. And he was like, oh, so you're saying there's a chance, which is like such a great, and it's like, man, a founder is really like that. Cause founders get like said no to all the time. And he's like, oh, that's my in. So then he actually, used his own app. He had a driver app, and he had like a working like app that you could, buy stuff from. He actually had thousands of products in the thing. He had hired 2 people off of Craigslist in Mountain View, California. And someone knocks on my door at the office, and he's like, hey, delivery for Garry Tan, and it's a 6-pack of beer. And I was like, oh, this is crazy. And I downloaded the app, and it was, totally working. It was ready to go. And like it was 2012. So we were seeing tons of people trying to pitch, like Uber was out as an idea, like the idea that you could have a large workforce being totally deployed by the smartphone. That was a new idea that wasn't quite proven, but it was very interesting. And so I was reading thousands of YC applications for people trying to do it, but here is someone who actually did it and sent me a 6-pack of beer. So I was like, oh, this is like basic intelligence test.
I love that so much. And there's always those stories of the person just taking that extra step. In a world where people are doing the bare minimum, if you can take that extra step, you're gonna stand out. And that's what that sounds like.
It's hard to extrapolate, right? I mean, the hard part is like you have to have the right idea and the right need at the right time. And the reason why a lot of people didn't fund Instacart was Webvan. There were people who said, oh, Webvan, that was a big colossal failure from the first boom where they had warehouses and, venture capitalists.
And what's
like,
different?
lost
The timing.
A ton of money, yeah. The difference is like 80% of people who could be drivers had smartphones in 2012. And that was like the moment for that idea, actually.
Right. Timing, so important. That product market fit.
So that's why the creator thing is happening now.
Yep. Hello.
Which is really cool.
of course, I make podcasts, but also I listen to them all the time. So I listen to Jason Calacanis. Is that how you say his last name?
Calacanis, yes.
Calacanis. I don't even,
Yes.
I should know complicated last names.
He's
I listen
hilarious.
to his podcast all the time.
I love him.
He's a hoot and a half on Twitter. But he had a really interesting podcast with the Figma co-founder recently. And he said some things that I'm glad I'm talking to you, because maybe you can share some insight on it, where essentially Figma kind of had 5 years of stealth mode where they were able to just build. And you look up now and they're valued at over, $100 million. This huge company. They've raised so much money. They obviously have a product that real people use. When I get thrown on, product Zooms all the time, they'll send me a Figma link for, a Twitter feature or something. So I see it in real life, but it seems like they really had a lot of time to just figure out their product. So when it comes to raising money, I imagine the founders who are reaching out, or vice versa, I feel like it's a relationship where the founders also have to be careful about who they're raising from as well, because I'm sure people's expectations are completely different from one VC firm to the other. So maybe you can share how Initialized does it, and then what is maybe the consensus in the industry. How often does that happen where a VC company, a VC firm will support a company for years and years and years before they show any hope of maybe that perfect product market fit, or before they actually start making money? Because it really, hearing his story was interesting, because I felt like we've entered this mode of, okay, they need to see that you're making money pretty quickly now. But it sounds like they had a lot of time to figure it out, and they had a lot of money to figure it out. What kind of company does it take to be that?
The thing that's interesting today is that there's really two types of startups. And what Silicon Valley classically has been really good at funding is the pure software startup, kind of like Figma. And then it's learning how to fund the Ubers and Airbnbs and all of the other sort of, full stack startup. And if you're a full stack startup, you touch something in the real economy, like Instacart. Like, that's all operations, right? You have the software piece. The software piece almost is the easier part. The harder part is like, how do you nail operations and marketing and like actually make enough money to make it a really good, profitable business? Like, Instacart was really smart, because when all of their competitors out there were actually, competing, they wanted to make the graph look up and to the right. So they kept launching more cities. And Instacart, instead of launching new cities, they said, we're just going to be profitable in San Francisco. And then that's why they won, actually. So that's a whole different, that's not what you asked, but that is like sort of, for most startups, you have to sort of figure out, like, am I something that touches the real economy? And then at that point, it's like transaction and margins and operations. And then what's funny is like, finance will actually value that less. So $1 over here is worth less than $1 over here, because, when you buy $100 worth of groceries, like Instacart gets like, a single digit percentage of it, right? Whereas like when you buy a Figma subscription, like all of it goes to Figma. So, which makes sense, right? And so that's why people love software, right? It's like owning Google or, Microsoft. Microsoft is the canonical example. It's like they get to charge rent on every single computer that's not a Mac, right? Or Apple, Apple in their own way, like charges hardware tax instead, right? They give away the operating system for free. So that's like one of the really interesting things. Like, there's really two types of startups, like, stuff that touches the real world, and then pure software. And then Figma, they were sort of chasing Adobe, right? Adobe, knew was a very valuable company, period. And then,
and you can look at the market that they have and look at that like, oh, wow, wait, there is a lot of potential.
Yeah. And in a way, like, it was actually very understandable, because I still use Photoshop, actually. So I'm dating myself, but
no, same.
And so, but it was kind of an obvious thing to say, well, the Photoshop for the web is going to be a thing, and you have to rewrite it from scratch in order for it to be collaborative, actually. And so that's going back to platform shift. I mean, the reason why Posterous could exist in 2008, whereas it wouldn't have existed in 2003 or 2004, was the iPhone, right? People wanted to email photos. Like, anytime there's a change in the technology platform, then there's actually an opportunity. And so Figma was really, really smart, and they probably did it right at the right time. Like it takes like 3 or 4 years to build really good software, actually. So sometimes these things take a while. And then that's where picking the right investor actually matters a lot. Like if you find people who have been around for a long time and have helped other people, like, when people are looking for investors, that's probably one of the more important things. Like, what else have they funded? Because that will help you hire better engineers and designers and product people. That'll let you raise better money from the next round. Like, unfortunately, like, there aren't that many stamps on the forehead to bring the conversation back around. It's like what Stanford was for some people in their careers. It's like investors are that for startups. And I'm not saying that's fair or right. It's just like in a world of finite capital and finite attention, like these are sort of the things you have to think about when you're trying to put something together. And so Figma had incredible investors who were very patient, and they had a thesis that they could rally around that like seemed inevitable. They just had to build it. And not everyone has that luxury, actually. Like, it's hard, right? Like, but then again, I'm saying that it's inevitable and like was obvious, but you can only say that in hindsight. In the moment, it was probably one of those other pitches that was like, oh yeah, they're gonna make Photoshop for the web. Like, lots of people are trying that. I mean, that's why this job is so hard. It's like pretty insane, honestly.
How much runway do the startups that you guys invest in have? Is that unique
that's a great question.
to each of the startups?
So the good thing is, I mean, if you have really good investors, they'll actually help you make the decision. And so, typically people try and go like 2 years if it's fast, or, they can stretch it to 3 or 5. We have some companies in the portfolio that have 4 or 5 years of runway, and more traditional VCs would be like, come on guys, I have a clock. Like, I got to return this money or something. But for us, it's like, those are teams that are working on really technically difficult things. And it's like, it's actually good that if they took 5 years to make something that nobody else has, like the next best competitor is 5 years behind at that point. And, going back to actually one of the more important things when it comes to startups, like that's a moat, right? Like, if there's infinite money and then infinite competition, then having a moat, like having a 5-year head start on everyone else, that's really, really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's what makes you unique as, a managing partner at a VC company, that you have that perspective of what it means to be a product manager, an engineer? You aren't just kind of a finance dude?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. Have you?
I rely on my community to keep me real that way, right? Like the thing is, money changes people, and I've seen it change people I know, and it's one of the things I'm very scared of, actually.
That's interesting. Is there something that you proactively do because when you say you're scared of it, is it, or how it could change you, or you've seen it change your friends? Is there something that you do that kind of guards you from that, of like, obviously you're going to be making bank, you probably are compared to the rest of the world, but is there something that, this is probably like the most niche question, but if it's on your brain, I'm sure you're thinking of it.
I try and surround myself with people who will call me on my BS.
Yeah. Can't just have yes men.
Right. That's the scariest thing to me. I actually talk about it a decent amount on my YouTube channel about, how should founders actually manage like their own position as a manager, right? Like, how do you make it safe for people to come to you and say, hey, that's effed up. Like, there's something wrong over here, right? And I actually struggle with it a lot. I mean, Steve Jobs, for instance, is a very fascinating character for me. In a recent episode, we talked about how, do you remember when Mobile Me came out? He actually came out and took the whole team and sat them down in an auditorium and then asked them what Mobile Me was. Sorry, this was not Mobile Me. It was, yes, it was Mobile Me before iCloud. This is the product before iCloud. They said, why doesn't it do what you said it was supposed to do? And then he took the head manager of that whole team and fired them publicly. And he was like, you should be embarrassed. Like, you have disgraced us. You've disgraced Apple. And I'm like, wow, like, this is Steve Jobs, right? This is the guy who like made the Mac. Like, this is the guy who made the iPhone, right? And is that necessary? And my hope is that it's not, right? But But it depends, right?
I'm going to have to look that up on YouTube after. I don't recall that at all. Dang.
Yeah, it's nuts. And then I think that that's the hardest thing about like privilege, about power. Yeah, it's easy to forget, right? I mean, I think that all people who work in tech, like we are all really, really privileged because what Wall Street is saying now, if you look at how companies are being valued by Wall Street, it's actually saying that some of these companies, like companies we've all heard of, right? Like Kroger or like even Walmart or different. I mean, why are the multiples so low? Why are the companies like valued so, they're just not valued very much? Or like GM versus Tesla, like why is that happening? Well, that's the street actually saying that if you don't have technology as a key part of what your business is, you might not have future cash flows. Like you might not have a business in 20 years.
Wow.
Right? And there's like risk, right? Like there are people who talk about holding on to incumbent businesses is actually possibly like taking long-term risk, because the funny thing about finance that I had to learn is it's not about how you're doing now. You're actually buying future cash flow. And then this goes back to why creators are so important now, because Facebook and Google have this thing called their ad auctions, which is actually really subtle and really important, because if you're Asus or you're Rode and you want that incremental customer over Acer or I don't know, whatever else, right? You actually have to pay Facebook and Google a tax. Like there's actually an auction, there's a bidding process. How these all businesses end up working is like, in order to grow, you're willing to pay up to your gross margin, up to how much it costs you to make the dang thing. And so what the auction means is like all of that extra money goes to Facebook and Google, because there's infinite competition and there's infinite capital. So everyone can do everything. And so that's why Facebook and Google, I remember in 2003 when I was graduating from Stanford, they wanted me to come do a PM interview. And I was like, I love Google. I use it all the time, but how are they ever going to make money? And the reality today in 2020 is like, how is any other company going to make money? Which is the craziest inversion.
And it's them having the foresight to say, hey, we are going to be one of the 5 toll booths of the internet. And we're going to take that toll, that tax every time someone wants, a piece of our attention. And that's essentially who everyone is, whether it's Amazon, Google, Facebook, YouTube. But
then we have our YouTube accounts and the YouTube accounts are ours, right?
Yeah, hopefully. I mean,
I know, right?
Sometimes they just disappear into the ether.
Oh, I know. That, or like people get sick of doing it and then they burn out, which is I'm also scared of. But, if you have any tips on how to avoid burnout, that would be. I'm very early in my YouTube career. So I'm like, not to turn the tables on you, but I'm like, how do I keep doing this?
I think burnout is something that is it's like everyone will have it at some point. If you make content, if you have a job that has to do with people telling you their opinion on you every single day, I think it's inevitable. But I think how I avoided it early on, and it really happened to me in a big way after, my biggest bump from the Casey Neistat video, was I wasn't doing the videos I wanted to do. I was doing daily vlogging because that's what Casey told me to do. Daily vlog. Got to post 5 times a week, and everyone was daily vlogging. And I kind of had to sit back, and when they weren't even doing that well and it wasn't fulfilling for me, that was a good opportunity where I was like, okay, you got to pivot. You got to bring the quantity down. Don't feel like you're held to a schedule, and just make what you want to make. Put it in the container of what will do well on YouTube. Don't forget that you're trying to make a job out of this. You can't necessarily be like, I'm just going to make what I want to make, and then not worry about thumbnails, not worry about titles, not worry about your audience, because they're obviously the reason that you're doing this. So it was one of those things where I'm grateful I took that pivot and kind of went back to how I started and just talking about the tech I'm interested in and the cameras and the laptops and adding my story to it. And hopefully people will come to each video because they care about me, not because, okay, well, I don't care about this piece of tech, so I'm going to wait until something's interesting. I think that's the bigger challenge, is making videos that are niche enough But at the same time, your audience, everyone who subscribes, each video you post is going to be for that subscriber, which is a hard balance to keep. But once I found that cadence and I was okay with the videos I was making, that was a good first step, and not just feeling terrible.
Yeah.
But the consistency is hard, right?
Oh, it's so hard. Yeah.
We got other things
struggling
going
with once
on.
a week. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the best thing that I did, now I like to be a little bit more consistent, but still to this day I'm not on a strict schedule, is just like, don't be on a strict schedule. I know that's probably the opposite of what everyone says. David Dobrik posted Monday, Wednesday, Friday. He had this, crazy growth. But I think where YouTube is at now, if you just have a good thumbnail and title after maybe not posting for 3 weeks, you're back to where you started. And that's actually where I'm grateful for the algorithm, because that consistency I don't think is as important.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if we can make a sort of tech startup VC YouTube. There are a few of us out there, but I'd love for there to be a lot more.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
If that can create more startups, then
exactly,
that would be awesome.
More value for the world, the better. I'm hopping around a lot, so apologies. But something I did want to go back to is those 2 years at Palantir. You said you were, even though you declined that initial offer, you were still employee number 10. So you were still hitting the ground running with that OG team. And what was your main role there? Was it product manager? What was it? And I'm sure that was...
it was a lot like being a startup founder. So I had to, put together the first product roadmaps, the process, the bug database. I realize now the bug database is really important to product anyway. And then hire the first team members, built the front end. So I really like places which let me just wear all the hats. And this is why I love video, because it's like
you have to wear all the hats.
I just had my second kid. Yeah.
Oh, congrats.
And I wanted to learn about, I just needed I couldn't code anymore because you need 12 hours of straight being able to do it. And so I needed some sort of outlet. And so watching your channel and, learning about how to put all of this stuff together, that was just the way I kept my brain turned on, I guess. But yeah, I mean, the most fun thing about being an early employee at a startup is that there aren't any rules. You're just making it up as you go. And I kind of really like that. Every every business has 3 phases. The commando phase, where people are sort of parachuting in and trying to take, but you can't hold on to the territory, right? But founders tend to be commandos. And then at some point, it shifts into, you need to manage an army. Actually, that's where you have to be a general. And then after you've won and you IPO'd or sold the company or whatever, then it's the police, right? And then the interesting thing is most people who work in knowledge work, they're actually in places that are more like the police. You need someone to go and keep the system running, but you don't get to be a commando. You don't get to be running around doing new things all the time. And so I think that's why I always really was drawn to more risk and the earlier stuff. Because, there are people watching this now who, part of it is if you're happy and doing what you're doing, don't change, right? There is this idea that it's sexier and more fun to be earlier. For me, it's I actually worked in these places that are much later, and I was dying actually. I needed that martini on Friday night, because exactly. It was I was crying because I couldn't do I couldn't affect the world at all, right?
Right.
And so people will self-select is the thing. I do think that it's a little dangerous. This is another success porn sort of thing that's scary for startup. I'm probably in danger of doing it myself, which is look, startups are not for everyone, right. And they're really brutal and hard, right? Mm-hmm. As I'm sure you're in the middle of, So
well, as a avid consumer of the content as well as a creator, I love movies or documentaries of these founders and the whole startup story. And even though it's a slightly cheesy movie, I love the movie The Intern with Anne Hathaway. So I'm my expectations all right, already a year in, we're gonna have our dope space in Brooklyn where I'm gonna be riding my Super 73 around the office saying what's up to people. You kind of dream about this ideal scenario, not it being 11 p.m. and trying to learn Jira to learn how to read the bug reports,
Yeah, totally.
So
they don't put that in the movie.
They don't put that in the movie. I haven't worn my freaking fancy jacket in so long, with Corona too. I'm like, oh, I kind of miss some of the conferences and the more, I don't know, like, those are fun, the more fun parts of this world. But there's a lot of stuff that people don't tell you about. But going back to that, the being at the beginning of the product, what makes that perfect product manager? Because people say that very, like, product manager, okay, you manage the product, you build timelines, but what did that look like for you there?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's the fun part, but also the really hard part, because here's this thing that the world needs. And the more specific you are about the person, the better. And then what is their problem? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And then you have to sort of distill that into basically features, like, here's this screen that goes into this screen that goes into this screen, but what if this happens? So that's like the feature level. And then you've got to sort of map that to what do the users actually want? And then you also have this other thing. It's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. It's like, how do you actually fit all these things in? Because then you have a finite number of engineers who can do like only so much in a couple of weeks. So you're like, okay, how do we stage it so that this stuff happens and then this works and then we can do that and then the next thing? That's really, the simplest way I could explain what a product manager does day to day. And if you zoom out, what that means is you're helping manage people, if not, hire. Sometimes you're hiring them, sometimes you're doing a lot of stuff there. You're also having to talk to the user, because you're like, oh, does this actually work? Like, you have to be the advocate for it, because the engineer like sometimes doesn't even talk to the user. So,
and then you go down the rabbit hole of the engineer working on something for weeks that you actually don't even need, or you don't need to change.
Yeah.
So making sure everyone's talking to each other.
Yeah, that'll happen, because everyone's like lives in their own little bubble. Mm-hmm. So that's where empathy and like actually that's where like product and being a creator is like they're not. Mechanically, they're very different businesses, but like your mindset is actually basically the same. Because when you make a video, you're like, what do people, where are they in their life?
Exactly.
And like, what do they need to hear right now?
Yeah.
Or what would they like to hear, and what do I think they need to hear?
Yeah.
And how do I help them?
And that video idea you had 2 months ago might be a little insensitive right now. Okay, so what do we?
That's the hardest one.
It is kind of a
don't get canceled. Everyone, I mean, it's so easy to get canceled these days.
It's
so it's
very easy. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that are, I mean, I think also with product managing, you said it well, where it's not just managing people and talking to the people within your company, but you are talking to users so often. Even when you don't have a product, you have to make a point to just always talk to people, because they might have a different experience than you. I think that's my biggest learning experience is, well, I'm the end all be all. I'm the example of the customer of this product we're building, so all you got to do is talk to me. But oh wait, no, you start to have conversations with other people and you're like, oh, that's a good point. I never thought about that. So, I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. It's the craziest thing to watch people use the thing you designed, and they'll never do it the way that you thought. It'll just blow your mind, actually.
Yeah. No, I love it. Well, Garry, wrapping things up, anything else you want to put into the ether, into the world? This was such a amazing conversation. We'll have to do a part 2 and 3 eventually.
That would be fun.
Yes.
Let's. Yes.
Yes. And where can people find you?
Oh, yeah. I'm just Garry Tan, GarryTan, on all the platforms. So Twitter, Instagram, and on YouTube. And my DMs are actually open on Instagram, which is an interesting experiment.
Ooh,
but that's
my
VC version. That's my VC version of talking to my users.
I love it.
And it actually helps me a lot on the content side.
Awesome.
Because things that I think are obvious, it's like, oh, well, actually, no. Like, people really need to hear this.
How has that been? Are you having like long conversations with people? Like, are they asking you questions about their companies and stuff?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Learning a lot. I mean, that's starting a startup is so hard. That's the thing. And I think that's the danger with like being too focused on like VCs are all in their PR world. Like everything is heavily processed and like perfect. And my whole thing is like, I don't have an editor. I just like put out whatever I think is actually valuable. And then I hope people just, I'm not perfect. Like I'm very far from perfect. In fact, my imperfection is what allows me to do my job better.
I love that.
Because like, here's a thousand ways I screwed up. Like, I don't want you to screw up in any of these ways, actually.
Yeah. No, and that makes for a great story. And it has been a lot of fun. It's cool to see, the fact that it's you and Alexis, both of you have such this public facing face on the internet. So it's been cool to watch the journey and all the money that you guys have been raising. I mean, what was the huge announcement that you just announced like a few weeks ago?
Just raised another $230 million, which is an outrageous amount of money, but we're supposed to give many, many multiples of that back in another 5 to 10 years. So
Yep. Love it.
It's basically just, celebrating the beginning of the race.
I love
which
that.
Is always fun.
No, and it's so exciting. I love everything that you share. Keep making YouTube videos. Don't get burned out.
Thanks, Sara.
The world needs you, Garry, and all of his
Thanks
links.
for your inspiration.
Of
I'm definitely doing
course.
this at least partially because I saw your videos and
love
learned a lot from you.
I mean,
so thank you.
Yeah, that makes me so happy. That's always just so fun to hear. Because at the end of the day, whenever I get a hate comment, whenever I get anything, to do with that, I just remember the people who are doing things in the world. Those are the people who say, hey, you helped me with this. And that's all that matters. That's really all that matters.
That's all we can do.
That's all we can do. Well, everyone check out Garry. His links are in the show notes below. Thank you so much for this epic conversation. Make sure you're subscribed to That Creative Life on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And until next time, guys, thank you for listening.